guys, my name is Tiffany and welcome back to my channel. I have another upcycle by Little Toe today where I take old forgotten items and give them a new life. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I turned this thrifted blazer into this two-piece set that is perfect for summer. If you like thrift flips and DIY sustainable fashion, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and let's get started. Let's take a quick look at the blazer. I thrifted this for $1 and the moment I saw it, I knew I had to figure out how to turn it into a matching set. It has a pretty boxy fit and there's really not that much fabric to work with, but I just love this floral print so much. I started by carefully seam ripping the entire blazer apart, like these pockets that were sewn to the front and even the collar, because I really wanted to maximize the fabric from the blazer. I can't really decide if I want to start with the top or the bottom, so we are going to let fate decide. Wow, I'm not good at this. Here is 6 seconds that you will never get back of watching me attempt to flip a coin and fail miserably. Okay, I obviously don't know how to flip a coin, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start with the skirt. I did it! I'm going to be reusing a pattern that I've previously used. I'm going to use the pattern I made for this dress, and I'm just going to be using the skirt portion of it, and I'll link that down below if you want to check that out. And I'll also link a free skirt pattern for you to use if you don't have one. Here's the pattern for the front of the skirt, and here is the fabric cutout, and this piece was cut on fold. Now I'm going to transfer the darts from the pattern onto the front of the skirt, and it should look something like this once both darts are sewn. Moving on to the back of the skirt. Here is the pattern I used, and here is the piece cut out. As you can see here, I've already sewn the dart. Then I went ahead and made the mirrored piece. To assemble my skirt, I'm placing the front piece right sides up and placing the corresponding back pieces, making sure that they are right sides facing. Now I'll sew the side seams, but I'll only sew to this point because I want 2 small slits on both sides. Sew, and you should have something that looks like this. I'm adding an invisible zipper to the center back, and I'll sew the rest of the center back seam together as well. Daisy has impeccable timing, and she paid me a little visit because she knows that zippers can sometimes be annoying to install. Here's what the zipper looks like sewn on, and at this point I decided that I wanted to add pockets, so I used the fabric that covered these shoulder pads and another scrap piece of fabric to create these pockets. I'll be the first to admit that these are some funny looking pockets, but I really tried to make it work with the limited fabric I had to work with. I decided not to make a waistband for the skirt, but opted for a facing instead. I used fabric from the lapel of the blazer, which worked perfectly since it already had interfacing ironed on. I placed my facing piece on the skirt right sides facing and pinned to make sure that the side seams lined up. I continue to pin all the way around, and now I'll sew with a straight stitch to secure. As you can see here, the zipper will now be sandwiched between the skirt and the facing. I'm going to sew a straight stitch right along the zipper teeth, securing the facing to the zipper, and I'll do this on both sides. Then I clip the corners to reduce any bulkiness, being careful not to cut through any of the stitching. Flip the facing over, and I'll give it a nice press, and I'll also understitch the facing to the seam allowance. Here is what the skirt should look like now, and the last step is to hem the skirt by folding the raw edge over twice and sewing to secure. Now that the skirt is done, let's move on to the top. I'm gonna start with the sleeves because as of right now, I don't have enough material for my bodice pieces, but I'm going to be using fabric from the sleeves to make the bodice, so let's get started. Also, this weather is insane because now all of a sudden it's the gloomiest day ever and the lighting is pretty awful, so I apologize in advance. I'm going for a short puff sleeve, so using my ruler and rotary cutter, I cut the sleeve to my desired length. To ensure that both my sleeves will be the same length, I use the first sleeve as a guide and then cut the second sleeve. To create a puffy sleeve, I'm going to have to make this existing sleeve a little wider. So I'm taking the fabric from the collar and marking the halfway point and cutting with my rotary cutter. I'm saving this half for the other sleeve, and I'll use this half as an extender piece, and I'll sew these pieces together here, and then trim this to match the rest of the sleeve. This is what it should look like when the pieces are sewn together, and I've gone ahead and modified the other sleeve as well. Moving on to the bodice. So there's 2 ways that you can make this, and I'm going to explain in detail a little later, but the most important thing is that the top is wide enough to be able to fit over your shoulders or your hips. And for me, that measurement was 40 inches. The first method is super simple. I'll cut out a rectangular piece of fabric, and to determine the width, I'll divide the 40 inches into 2, which gives me 20 inches. The height of the top will be determined on how long or short you want your top to be, and for me, I decided on 8.5 inches. This will be the front of the top. For the back, I'll cut out an identical piece of fabric. Then place these 2 pieces right sides facing, sew along the side seams, and that's it. On to the second method and the one I will be using. Again, I'll start out with a rectangular piece of fabric. I want the front to be slightly wider than the back, so I'm going to cut mine to 24 inches. Again, I'll keep the height at 8.5 inches. For a more comfortable fit, I'm going to freehand these curves that will become part of the armhole, making sure that the length of the new side seam will be 4.5 inches. For the back, again, I start with a rectangle. And to determine this width, I take 40 minus 24, which gives me 16 inches. I want my back piece to be a little shorter, so I've chosen to go with 6.5 inches. Just like the front, I'll freehand these curves, again making sure that the new side seams measure 4.5 inches to match the front piece. These are the two pieces I'll cut out to make my bodice. With the measurements I mentioned earlier, I cut out my front bodice piece. I've also gone ahead and hemmed the top and bottom. I didn't have a large enough piece of fabric, so I sewed the two pieces I cut out from the original sleeves together. Next, I'm going to shirr the fabric by sewing rows using elastic thread. So I think I'm actually gonna call it a day. It is so gloomy and it's making me feel really lazy and not motivated. And I'm also a little bit hungry, so I'm going to put this away and I'll pick this up tomorrow. It is a new day and I just ate waffles for breakfast, so I am feeling good and I'm ready to finish this top. I've shirred before on my channel and I think this is going to be a relatively short video, so I'm going to show you step by step on exactly how I do this. I'm going to be using elastic thread and I got this on Amazon and I'm pretty sure it was under $5. I have an empty bobbin here and now I'm going to hand wind the elastic thread onto the bobbin. So you're going to want to have the elastic thread pretty snug on your bobbin, but in a neutral way, so you don't want it too tight and you don't want it too loose. So when you wind, you just have to make sure not to stretch the elastic at all. I also make sure to alternate hands so that the elastic winds evenly on both sides of the bobbin. This is what the bobbin should look like, and now we're ready to shirr. I'm loading my bobbin into my machine the same way I normally would. I have my tension set at 3, and even though I'll shirr with the longest stitch length on my machine, I like to start with my stitch length at a 2. My needle is set to the left position and I'll be using my presser foot as a guide. As you can see here, I'm lining up the edge of my presser foot to this edge of my front bodice piece. I'm starting out by sewing a few stitches, then backstitching, and then a couple more stitches forward. Once the first few stitches are secure, I'm now going to change my stitch length to the longest stitch, which for me is a 4, and continue to sew until I reach the end. I'm not sure if this is the correct way to do this, but this is just a method I use to ensure that my stitches don't come undone. I repeat the same steps when I get to the end by changing my stitch length back to a 2 and then backstitching again, securing this row. For the next row, I use my presser foot again as a guide and line up the edge with the first row. Then I repeat the sewing process. Now I'll continue to sew rows until I've shirred the entire piece. I just made a rookie mistake and I forgot to switch my stitch length back to the longer one and I sewed an entire row. I'm gonna show you guys what it looks like. This is the row that I just did with the shorter stitch length, and you can see how it looks slightly different from the ones with the longer stitch length. And because the stitches are so close together, it just doesn't stretch and gather the fabric the same way, so I'm just going to have to seam rip this and then start over. Don't be me, don't make that mistake. Now that my front piece is completely shirred, I'm spraying some water and using my iron to create steam, as this helps shrink the elastic and the gathers will condense even more. Based on my measurements from earlier, I've cut out my back bodice piece, and again I've gone ahead and hemmed the top and bottom. I'm repeating all of the same steps from before, and here is the shirred back piece. Now I'm placing both of these pieces right side spacing and pinning along the side seams. Sew together and you should have something that looks like this. So close to being done with this project. Last step is to attach the sleeves. First thing I'm going to do is fold the raw edge of the sleeve cap curve about 1/4 of an inch and press all the way around. Then I'll fold again, hiding the raw edge, and press again. This step is optional but will make things a little easier when sewing this later. Now I'll use the bodice as a guide to see which part of the sleeve will be sewn to the bodice. I line this folded edge of the sleeve with the side seam of the top and then use a pin to mark this point on the sleeve. I do the same on the other side. Here are the 2 pins, and this section in between them is what will be sewn to the bodice later. I'm going to sew from here to here, creating a channel. Once the channel is sewn, I'll insert this elastic string. Using a safety pin, I thread it through the channel. I'll sew a straight stitch here to secure the end of the elastic in place, and I'll do the same on the other side. The elastic is now secure in its channel, and I've also gone ahead and sewn the remainder of the sleeve here, hiding all of the raw edges. Now I'll hem the sleeve by folding over twice and then sewing, making sure to leave a 1-inch hole. I'll be using 1/4 inch elastic, and using a safety pin, I insert the elastic through the channel. I'll sew the 2 ends of the elastic together with a zigzag stitch, and then I'll sew the 1-inch hole closed. This is what the sleeve should look like now, and I'm going to pin it right side spacing to the bodice. Sew together, and this is what the top should look like now. Last step is to sew on the other sleeve. So I've sewed both of my sleeves on, but I decided that I think I want more volume on the sleeves, and I actually have these pocket pieces left over from the blazer, so I think I'm going to seam rip these sleeves and then add these pockets to the sleeves to make them even puffier. Here is the sleeve I made, and I've gone ahead and seam ripped the elastic from the sleeve cap curve and the hem. Here is the pocket piece from the original blazer. I was hoping it would be tall enough so I could just cut the sleeve in half and insert the full pocket as a panel, but unfortunately it's not, so I had to get a little creative. I decided to cut the pocket into 2 pieces. Now I'm going to cut this sleeve here and here, creating these 2 separate pieces that should look something like this. To piece the sleeve back together, I'll start by sewing these 3 pieces together. Then I'll sew this piece to create a new wider sleeve. Here is what it should look like with the 2 panels sewn in. At this point, the sleeve cap curve is going to look a little wonky, but I'll clean that up using my rotary cutter. Now, following the same steps as earlier, I'll finish the hem with the same 1/4 inch elastic and the sleeve cap curve with the same elastic string. Here are both of my completed sleeves. I'll sew them to my bodice piece, and here is the completed top. Shirt tops look so funny to me because it always looks way too small for any normal size human to wear, and I have to remind myself that it's super stretchy. Here is what it looks like in the back, and you can see here that the back is slightly lower than the front. Here's the completed outfit. This was a pretty easy upcycle, but I think it turned out pretty cute. I love that they are separate pieces so I can wear them with so many other things. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more photos of this completed outfit, make sure to follow me on Instagram at @LittleToe. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this upcycle and if you have any suggestions on what I should upcycle next. As always, thank you so much for watching.